going to art school. Let me do a little introduction of myself first. Hi, I'm Jada. I am a rising sophomore at the School of Fine Art at Carnegie Mellon University. My own art making concentration is in drawing, painting, printmaking, and photography, although I'm not as involved with the photography part of it. It's called DP3 at my university. And I also have a minor in human-computer interaction that I'm going to turn into a major, and that's why I can talk a little bit about additional majors as well. So, I mean, I guess the first question that would come up when talking about wanting to go to art school is that what exactly is an art school and what exactly would you be doing at an art school? Well, most art schools offer a thing called a BFA instead of a BA or a BS. BFA stands for Bachelor in Fine Arts, and requirements for bachelors in fine arts is that most of your classes will be involved in studios with a proportion of general education credits and art history credits as well. BFAs don't always stand for just visual arts. They can also stand for things like music and dance. But my concentration is visual arts, so I can't really talk much about that. Usually the ratio for classes in a BFA it's about 60 to 70% studio classes, maybe like 10% art history, and then 20% general education credits, which means stuff outside of art, such as like science, history, math, English. Although you might know that these might not be as strong in pure fine arts. That's what gets me to my next point, is that sometimes a research or liberal arts university can have an art school or college within it. For example, CMU, I think, is primarily known for its computer science and engineering departments, but I am in its fine arts school, and its school drama is also pretty well known. What are some good things about going to an art school? Well, I think the way to think about it is if you're the right kind of person for art school can really fast track your art improvement. Because you're surrounded by an environment of peers, they will always constantly be looking at what you make and kind of talking about it, and they are, if you find the right community, they can really pick out what is maybe not working in your practice and what you can do better, and it really kind of helps you to look at what you've done and improve faster. Another thing that's really good about it is that it's really structured, so you have to be in the studio for at least 40 hours a week making stuff, and the more you make, the better you get. The last part is that art school provides you with a lot of facilities. For example, some schools have print studios where you can do printmaking, whether that be serigraphy or just standard photography. And for example, our school has 3D printing facilities, which is nice for people who like to do 3D modeling. And a lot of animation schools also have animation labs where they provide you with animation software. However, some schools will still have you pay for facilities, or they'll block facilities in high school because they're really popular. So that's why I didn't ask for this next to it, because it's not necessarily that you're going to be able to get to use the facilities for one school year, especially if they're really long. Now let's talk about some cons of art school. If you go to a pure fine art school, you might not be able to pursue certain academic avenues. For example, if you go to art school, you may not be able to advance as much in other sides, and this kind of cuts off additional majors. But this is only if you're going to a school such as RISD, SVA, CalArts, Art Center, MICA, because if you do end up going to an art school within a research university like I am, or for example the Brown RISD dual degree program, you can still explore academic avenues while also getting a BFA. Another thing is that in the US, at the very least, BFAs are kind of centered around expanding practice. So you're going to have to take classes, for example, even if you're a painting major at RISD, at least 1/3 of your studios will be studios not in your primary major. So metal sculpture. Maybe art school is the right place for that, because you are going to have to think outside of what you like. Another thing is burnout. Burnout is really big because you're like always doing art, always making art all the time. I have friends who would be in studio until like 2 a.m. every single day. And near the end of the semester, during the final project times, there were people who would just sleep in studio because, like, even though art has the reputation of being like an easy major, it's really not. It's all about how much you put into it, and if you're putting like everything into it, it's really a challenge in time management and kind of like it's like testing your dedication. But this is not to like put you off, because if you love it, like it's still good. Absolutely amazing. The last thing would be that art school. It kind of ties into what I was talking about. The art schools, what you think of it. If you aren't putting in the hours at studio and you're kind of like coasting through class by just doing like the bare minimum, and you're like still having a bunch of free time, like the art school might not be worth it, because the reason why you improve is because you're putting in the hours and you're making changes based on what is working and what's not working. If you're not spending time doing that, it's kind of useless. Let's talk about some alternatives of art school then. So like, you might have heard this and you got scared and you said like, oh, well, maybe art school's not for me. Well, yeah, there's still lots of alternatives to doing like a pure BFA only. There's lots of online classes now that like are actually pretty good, because as long as they work on a feedback model and are not just like self-paced, like some people can do the self-paced thing, but it's better to have feedback, because critique is kind of really proof, because it's all about seeing what you can improve. Another thing is like going to an art school in a university, or like doing a minor in art at a university that also has an art department. And the last option would be going back to school for an MFA without doing a BFA, because MFA is kind of where they get specific and they start really elevating your practice. And it also takes 2 years instead of 4, so it's less of a financial burden. So, let's say you've heard the rest of this presentation, you say you still really want to attend art school. Well, what does an art school application usually entail? Majority of all the decent art schools will require 5 to 15 pieces of your best work photographed like semi-professionally, and you will have to have descriptors under them. Usually they do this through slide group. Every school is going to be different as to what they require in a portfolio. You'll have to read the school blurbs, and ideally you will also be getting portfolio reviews at National Portfolio Day in San Francisco. There is one that happens every year around November, which means that probably you're not going to be able to get in it, unless you do it in the 11th grade, you won't be able to get it in time for actually the early decision art school applications, but you will still be able to get in. And then let's talk a little bit about like what art schools are actually looking for. I have talked to, they're usually not allowed to like tell me these things, but sometimes professors let things slip. Usually art schools, basically they will be looking at a whole bunch of applicants and they're kind of just looking through your portfolios really, really fast. And one thing that my professor once told me is that 70% of people you can literally eliminate within the first 5 seconds, but it's between that 30% is where like all the real competition happens. They look for a lot of like technical skills, but it's not just about the technical skills. Because a lot of people have technical skills, but they don't really have a concept behind it. They're looking for how to apply your skills to like communicating ideas, and this is why like knowing how to write about your work is also really important when applying to art school, because you can't just be making pieces, you also have to be explaining how and why you make pieces and make the artistic decisions that you do. And they also, majority, 99% of art schools also are looking for people who have pushed their boundaries already and are looking to push boundaries further. So if your entire portfolio is something like just like digital painting, with a few exceptions where they're specifically looking for digital painters, your graphic design schools, they're looking for a very specific tailored portfolio that will usually have like specific requirements, like you need 15 to 20 live drawings, and then you need like a series of like story-based works. In which case, I know like a lot of people who have lived in an animation school have probably seen like all the palette sketchbooks and stuff like that. My advice would be that like don't approach applying to these kind of specialized art schools any different than you do applying to a regular art school, because it's really tempting to just copy the style of someone you see online, but it's usually not the style it's the process of how they talk about making art. So you have to really analyze the choices they make rather than the way they do it. It's kind of hard to explain. But I'd say it's more about like research and less more about researching what you're making and less about the actual making. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions about applying